The saloon smelled of stale whiskey and smoke, its floorboards creaking beneath the boots of ranch hands, miners, and townsfolk who had crammed themselves shoulder to shoulder for the spectacle. Outside, the setting sun burned a copper glow over the dusty street, but inside, the air was heavy with anticipation. Men leaned on the bar, women pressed against the walls, and a restless murmur rippled through the crowd. Everyone had come to see the mountain man stand trial, and most believed they already knew how it would end. Elias Crow stood in the center of the room, towering over the sheriff who held the rope binding his wrists. His broad shoulders and thick beard made him look like something carved out of the wilderness itself. His shirt was rough-spun and patched, his boots worn from years of climbing rock and trudging through snow. His eyes were gray, the color of an oncoming storm, and though his face was calm, the weight of solitude pressed against him like a boulder rolling down a slope. He had spent most of his life in the high peaks, far from towns, where rivers sang louder than voices and pines kept their secrets. To the people gathered, he was as much legend as man, a figure whispered about in saloons, feared by children, and envied by men too soft to live as he did. Sheriff Bolton stepped forward and raised a hand for silence. "Court is in session," he said, though this was no real courtroom. The saloon's card tables had been pushed aside, and Judge Wilkins sat behind the bar with a gavel that had never seen proper use. The accused, Elias Crow, stands before us charged with theft, assault, and unlawful possession of livestock belonging to Mr. Henry Dawson. At the mention of Dawson's name, a murmur of approval rolled through the crowd. Henry Dawson himself leaned smugly against a post, dressed in fine clothes and wearing a gold chain that glimmered in the lamplight. He was a man who owned half the valley's land and acted as if he owned the people too. It was his word that had dragged Elias down from the mountains and into chains. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Dawson claims that Elias Crow raided his supply wagons, beat his hired men, and made off with cattle. Do you deny these charges, Crow?" Elias lifted his head, his voice deep and steady, though unused to speaking before so many. "I took nothing that wasn't mine by trade. I've stolen from no man. As for fighting, I harmed none unless they came at me first." His words rolled like distant thunder, simple but firm, and for a heartbeat, silence filled the room. Then Dawson barked a laugh. "Listen to him, hides behind his mountain talk, but I've got men who'll swear he struck first, men he nearly killed. The brute's a danger to civilized folk." A few nodded in agreement, but others shifted uneasily. Elias stood without flinching, his bound hands resting before him, his gaze fixed not on Dawson but on the judge. "I've lived in the high country near 10 years, he said. "Traded pelts, meat, herbs. Folks here know I come down twice a season. Never before has a word been spoken against me. You think I'd suddenly turn thief now?" There was truth in his tone, heavy as stone, but the balance of power was against him. Dawson had influence. Dawson paid the bills that kept the town running. And Elias had no one. Judge Wilkins tapped the gavel against the bar. "Do you have witnesses, Crow? Any man to speak in your defense? Any kinfolk who'll vouch for your character?" The question hung in the smoky air like a noose. Everyone knew the answer. Elias had no family here, no friends to risk Dawson's wrath, no lawyer to untangle the snares of the law. He was a solitary figure, a wild man dragged into a world that didn't care for him. He stood alone, a mountain against a tide, of voices ready to sweep him away. Elias's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Silence stretched, broken only by the nervous cough of someone in the back. The crowd shifted restlessly, their earlier excitement sharpening into something crueler. The man with no one was easier to condemn. Dawson stepped forward, smirking. "There you have it, Judge. Not a soul will speak for him. Sentence the beast and be done with it." The judge nodded grimly, fingers tightening around the gavel. "If no testimony is offered in your favor, Elias Crow, the jury will." The creak of wood cut him short. The saloon's double doors swung open with a groan, letting in a sliver of fading daylight. Conversations died, heads turned, and for a moment the whole room seemed to hold its breath. Boot heels clicked across the floor, sharp and steady, echoing louder than the hush that fell. A figure stepped inside, her silhouette framed by the glow of the setting sun. The dust and smoke of the saloon seemed to bend around her as she walked with a confidence that made even Dawson's smirk falter. The trial was about to change, though no one yet knew how. Elias lifted his storm-gray eyes, and for the first time that evening, surprise flickered across his face. The mountain man, who had stood alone before the world, found his solitude suddenly broken. The saloon doors swung wider, letting in a shaft of sunlight that turned the haze of smoke to gold. All eyes fixed on the figure stepping inside, and for a long breath the crowded room seemed to forget its own noise. The woman who entered carried an air so unlike the dusty settlement that it felt as if a piece of Denver's finest parlor had walked into the wild frontier. Her dress, though travel-worn, shimmered faintly with silk, her hat was trimmed with a plume of deep green, and her gloves, pale as mountain snow, were drawn tight over slender hands. She walked as if she owned the place, not with arrogance but with an unshakable certainty. The click of her heels against the wooden floor drew every gaze. Men who had been leaning forward to spit their judgments on Elias now stood back, blinking, while women whispered behind gloved hands. No one knew her, and yet no one dared interrupt her stride. She moved past the bar, past the jury table, past Henry Dawson's sneering face, straight toward the bound mountain man who stood in the center. Elias Crow had faced blizzards that stripped flesh from bone, wolves that circled in the night, and the loneliness of peaks where no voice but his own echoed back. None of that shook him like the sight of this woman. His gray eyes flickered, first with recognition, then with something else, a kind of quiet, reverent disbelief. His massive frame stiffened, his hands clenching against the ropes, but he did not step back as she came to his side. Without hesitation, she slipped her hand through the crook of his arm as though it had always belonged there. Her chin lifted, her gaze sweeping the saloon until it rested on Judge Wilkins. Her voice rang out, clear as a bell and steady as a church hymn. "This man is no thief, nor an outcast. He is my husband." The words cracked through the room like a rifle shot. Gasps followed, rolling through the crowd in a wave of disbelief. The sheriff's mouth fell open. The judge nearly toppled his glass of water. Henry Dawson's face twisted red, his smugness shattering into fury. "That's a damn lie," he thundered. "That savage has no wife." But the woman was unmoved. Her eyes turned on Dawson, and the sharpness of her gaze cut him to silence quicker than a blade. "I am Clara Whitmore," she announced, her voice rising with the force of a declaration. "Of the Whitmore family of Denver. Perhaps you've heard of us." The name rippled through the crowd like wind. Through tall grass. Whitmore meant railroads, mines, money that could buy and sell half the valley. Even those who had never left the frontier knew the weight it carried. Clara slipped her hand into a satchel at her side and produced a folded packet of papers, their wax seal glinting in the lamplight. 3 years ago, Elias Crow and I wed in the mountains. Away from your eyes, away from gossip, but bound in truth nonetheless. I have letters, documents, and witnesses in Denver should you doubt me. This man has been my protector and my husband, not a criminal." She laid the papers upon the bar before Judge Wilkins, who stammered as he looked them over. Dawson lunged a step forward, sputtering, "This is a trick, her kind don't marry the likes of him. He's a brute, a hermit." Clara cut him short with a single word, spoken like a command. "Enough." She stood taller beside Elias, her hand firm on his arm. "You may own land and cattle, Mr. Dawson, but you do not own truth. My husband has never stolen from you. It is you who spreads lies to rid yourself of a man too strong to bow before your greed." A murmur swept through the room, this time not of mockery but of shifting loyalties. Men who had come to watch Elias fall now exchanged glances, uncertain. The judge cleared his throat, shuffling the papers nervously. "If what you say is true, Mrs. Whitmore, then Mr. Crow is not without standing before this court. The law cannot dismiss such testimony so lightly." Elias finally spoke, his voice a low rumble that carried through the tense silence. "She speaks plain. Clara's my wife. I never meant to bring her into this storm, but I won't deny her word." For the first time since the trial began, his solitude cracked like ice under spring thaw. He was no longer the lone mountain man facing a valley eager to condemn him. He was a husband, a man bound to another, and that bond carried a strength greater than his own. Clara's presence burned away the sneers and doubts, her courage shining brighter than the gold Dawson wore. The jury shifted uneasily, no longer so eager to condemn. Judge Wilkins dabbed his brow with a kerchief, already sensing how precarious Dawson's accusations had become. Dawson tried once more, his voice rising desperate. "You can't let this stand, Judge. This is a ruse. A fine lady like her would never bind herself to a wild man." Clara's laugh rang sharp and unyielding. "You know nothing of what binds two people, Mr. Dawson. Wealth without honor is worth less than the dirt beneath his boots. Elias has more truth in one word than you have in all your gold." Elias looked down at her, his storm gray eyes softening, and for the first time since he had entered the saloon, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. The crowd, sensing the tide had turned, leaned forward, whispering in tones no longer certain of Dawson's victory. The trial that had seemed a noose tightening around the mountain man now shifted, the weight swinging the other way. With Clara at his side, Elias Crow no longer stood condemned by loneliness. He stood defended, not by lawyers or friends, but by a woman whose voice carried more strength than all the jeers of the valley. And as the sun dipped lower through the saloon windows, painting the room in gold and shadow, the people of the town realized that the mountain man was not standing trial alone at all. He had someone who would call him husband, and in that moment, the wild, untamed strength of the mountains met the unyielding power of a rich woman's courage, and together, they shook the room to its foundations.